Stand up straight with your shoulders back. That's the title of the first chapter in Jordan Peterson's new book, 12 Rules for Life. It was also the theme of his recent Melbourne talk as part of an Australia tour with Dave Rubin as the opener. I just got given a ticket, is that the right way around? I just got given a ticket to go to Jordan Peterson, thanks to David Hiscox, who for some reason decided to give me a gift, which is fantastic. He gave bad directions. I went to the exact place that he told me to go, one convention place.
I told you, on Spencer Street, opposite the casino. I'm hijacking your vlog, Matty.
You can try and hijack, but I'm going to go and see Jordan Peterson, and I don't know, maybe you can make a vlog out of this. I don't know if we can. But
are you going to ask him if culture is downstream from race?
I don't think I'm going to ask him any questions,
No.
to be fair. I think I'm just going to enjoy it and maybe make content out of this. We'll know, if you're seeing this on the internet, you will know that there is content made out of it.
Do you think he's going to talk about how we shouldn't work together as a team?
I think he's going to tell me to clean my room because it's filthy, and he's going to tell me to get my act together, and I'm going to say that's great advice, partial dad. I wish I'd heard that advice earlier in my life, but yes.
Do you think he'll be accused of being a member of the alt-right?
Well, what's the alt-right? I have no idea what that even means anymore.
Yeah, good point.
I actually read, how's this? I read the Associated Press guide to the alt-right, and it essentially can mean almost anything, and they admit that it can mean, it's white identitarianism, white supremacy, and even neo-Nazis and all this kind of stuff, and they essentially say to be deliberately vague when referring to my alt-right. So ultimately, it doesn't really mean much. There's no solid definition.
Does it include people who are members of the intellectual dark web?
Well, I guess that's up to the journalist in question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was a sold-out show with more than 5,000 people turning up. This is easily the largest audience I've ever seen for this kind of content. And Dave Rubin mentioned it was the largest audience they've had for this speaking tour. Just sat in my seat and I can't believe there's this many people here. This bloke is an absolute rock star, and he sold out a second show in about 2 to 3 weeks' time as well. Must be making an absolute killing. He doesn't need Patreon. He can just shut his Patreon down forever and never take donations, because all he'd need to do is one tour a year through Australia and he'll be a millionaire for life. I wanted to do a full vlog on the event, but unfortunately there weren't any protesters, so there wasn't a great deal of vlog content. I decided to do a review of the talk itself. I'll discuss the content, what I thought was good, and some criticisms. Cameras weren't allowed, so unfortunately there isn't much visual content either. Before we continue, for some amazing karma, please check out Subscribestar, where for as little as $5 a month you can support my work and help save Western civilization. Dave Rubin opened the show with a bit of comedy to warm the crowd up, and it was actually decent. Not the best comedy in the world, but it was funny. The gags are for those who consume predominantly internet content. He joked about things like Kathy Newman and made fun of Ben Shapiro's height. It was a good and positive start. Enter the man himself, Jordan Peterson, to a standing ovation. He began by mentioning the fact that human history is one of brutality and an endless fight against the odds that our ancestors ultimately won. He pointed out that poverty around the world is reducing at a rate we couldn't even dream of, and that the idea that we are running out of space and resources is rubbish. It's been proven wrong. Just for one example, there are now more obese people in the world than starving people. This is the kind of problem that's almost a blessing compared to history, and while it is a problem that we shouldn't underestimate, it's also a measure of our overwhelming success. He asked the question, would you rather be John Rockefeller in 1919 or middle class today? Mentioning that while the status would have probably felt good, even the richest people in the early 20th century had no access to what even the poorest Westerners have today. Antibiotics that would have saved Rockefeller's son, for instance. One point he made is that we aren't running out of energy, given that the entire universe is made of matter and energy. A fair point if you ask me. Scares like peak oil are complete bull. Peterson criticised those who consider human beings a blight on the planet and considers them some of the worst kinds of people. On this, I also agree with him. Globalists are hell-bent on bringing all humanity under one government and, if reports on things like the Committee of 300 are accurate, to wipe out the vast majority of human beings. This is a horrible goal to have. Peterson used this talk to explain how we have become so successful and did so by mentioning hierarchies. The title of the talk was "Stand Up Straight with Your Shoulders Back After All," just like the lobsters. He took aim at postmodernists and the idea that all human interaction is one big power struggle, mentioning that this is demonstrably false. If all interactions are just power struggles, we never would have made it as far as we have. In fact, our hierarchies are built on competence, where those with the skills we value most tend to rise to the top of society, and the so-called 1% are constantly changing. This is mostly true. Where he's wrong is that the 1% of the 1% aren't changing, and that's due to the fact that they control the supply of money and are backed by state force. He mentioned his work for the UN and laughed at the fact that people accuse him of being a globalist shill for doing it. Essentially, he was asked to work on a project and couldn't say no. That is to say, he's not an ethnic nationalist per se, yet, but he's not a globalist either. He finished up with his usual call for people to take ownership of their own lives and to work on improving themselves. Mentioning that in Genesis, Jacob wrestles with God and wins, then he becomes the founder of ancient Israel. The point being that those who work and fight for the highest possible ideal are the people who found holy states. Therefore, it's important that all individuals take this attitude, and we are all here to bring being into existence through our consciousness. In that way, we are made in the image of God. Peterson was almost manic throughout the lecture. He spoke a lot quicker than he normally does and got emotional towards the end, recounting a story about his father-in-law taking care of his mother-in-law's battle with dementia that ultimately killed her. This isn't out of the ordinary for Peterson, as he's a man who wears his emotions on his sleeve, and you could really see he felt inspired by the actions of his father-in-law. The audience was engaged all the way through, and I found it interesting despite the fact that much of what he said I'd heard before, which is my number one criticism. When Stefan Molyneux came to town, he wrote new content and presented it, making it an exciting and novel experience. Same for Milo when he toured. Yet, this talk of Peterson's, despite adding in a couple of anecdotes and a few jokes, was much the same. I understand it's just a tour promoting his book, which has sold over 3 million copies, but you could easily get the same information by simply watching his interview with Dave Rubin regarding the same book. I'll add that link into the description. My second criticism is the same criticism I will always have of Peterson until he addresses it. That is, he doesn't ever get into issues of racial identity. He likes to remind people that it's important to do what's best for yourself, your family, and your community, but ignores the fact that your ethnicity is essentially an extended family, and this is the natural nation. He correctly identifies the individual as the source of rights, and even points out that each individual is one, not the, centre of the universe in their own space. Yet, he fails to discuss how we are supposed to protect those individual rights and what the best way to organise a group is. However, his unwillingness to tackle these issues does not detract from the advice he is actually giving. It's up to us, as individuals, to reclaim our racial consciousness and do what we can to red pill those around us. It's not Peterson's fault, he is just a boomer, after all. Heh heh. Hashtag not all boomers. He partially addressed this in the Q&A, in which he took questions submitted by the audience before the show. Jordan was asked if he'd go into politics, and basically just said no, because he doesn't have the temperament for it, which is fair enough. The Q&A itself was relaxed and informal, with questions like who will win the WWE Championship and what does the B mean in Jordan B. Peterson? To which the answer is Barent, and it's after his grandfather, a Norwegian blacksmith who built his own boat to sail to the Americas. Now that's hardcore, very Norwegian. The name even means bear. The show ended with a second standing ovation. Overall, I enjoyed the event. It was different to other talks like this that I have been to, and the content was good enough to make it worth the price of admission. Again, it wasn't all entirely new if you are familiar with Peterson's work, but it was good for a refresher course. The fact that 5,000 people bought tickets is amazing, and that this occurred in Melbourne says a lot. I know there are people in the nationalist movement who don't like Peterson for the reasons stated, but remember, his ideas are novel to normies. Melbourne is Australia's most left-wing infested city, and the fact that so many people paid good money to hear this content that the left dislike more than his nationalist critics sends a clear message. That is, the louder and more dominant the left become, the more people are likely to seek out new ideas and information. This alone should tell you what direction our society is heading. The tide has indeed turned, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes a fully blown tsunami. This is why the left are so critical of men like Jordan Peterson, despite the fact that they aren't even fully fighting against them. They know that once people open their minds to new ways of thinking and truth-seeking, it's only a matter of time until they become fully aware of themselves and their own racial and ethnic identity. It's okay to be white, it's okay to be proud of being white, and it's okay to want whites to remain a supermajority in our own countries. Wanting these things does not mean you dislike outsiders based on their race. It simply means you want what's best for yourself, your family, your extended family, your extended family, and your extended family, otherwise known as the natural nation. Never, ever stop telling this truth. I hope you enjoyed the video, share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya.